A few weeks ago, I was at Edzo's during lunch, trying to get a quick bite to eat. I was in a hurry to get back to school so I could take a math exam that I had missed. I was intending to scarf down a burger as quick as I could. I got up to the counter, I ordered my usual burger, and reached for my wallet to pay, except that my wallet wasn't there. I froze for a second, my mind racing as I tried to think about where my wallet could be. I patted down myself at least 10 times and made sure that my wallet was, in fact, not in my pocket. I looked up at the man in the counter, realizing that I couldn't pay for what I had ordered. And I told him that I had forgotten my wallet, and I would hurry home and go get it. I lived close by. But he stopped me right there. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Pay me back whenever." He smiled at me, and I was amazed at his ability to trust me. But I also felt shame because I knew that I would not be so kind were I in his shoes. I have heard the story of Thomas's doubts maybe 100 times in my life, and each and every time it fills me with that same sense of shame I feel as when I wouldn't have been so kind as that man at the counter. Thomas was one of the disciples, so he must have heard that Jesus was going to return. Thomas even had heard the testimony of the other disciples to inform him that Jesus was risen. But Thomas was a firm believer in empirical evidence. He had to feel the evidence with his own hands before he could believe in Jesus' resurrection. He couldn't believe in Jesus on faith alone. And it's easy to understand why Thomas couldn't believe the disciples. Thomas was certainly grieving for Jesus. And the idea that he had to somehow go on without a dear friend like Jesus was probably becoming a very difficult reality in his mind. And then the disciples rush up to Thomas and say that Jesus is alive. Thomas cannot just up and believe the disciples. No one in that kind of situation would want to get their hopes up and believe that Jesus had returned. Thomas had lost Jesus once. He wasn't looking forward to feeling that loss again. In our world, it's not easy to believe that people will physically come back to life. So Thomas protected his emotions by waiting until he could see Jesus for himself. So no one can blame Thomas for not accepting the disciples' words immediately and only believing what was undoubtedly and verifiably true. No one can blame Thomas for possibly thinking that maybe Jesus' talks of resurrections weren't about leaving the tomb, but about being resurrected and ascending to heaven. Thomas had no direct evidence of Jesus' return, so he couldn't believe it. And therein lies the greatest difficulty with religion, the necessity of faith without evidence. I make that mistake myself often. I have trouble believing people who I see on the CTA train telling everyone who will listen stories of sick relatives that need treatment or asking for $20 for a 30-day pass, even though they're already riding the train. It's not that I know it's not true. It may be true. I just have my doubts. It's difficult to believe someone's story on the train when you have no verification, let alone believe that someone rose from the dead. So when Jesus came to Thomas, he was not angry because of Thomas's doubts. Jesus did not denounce Thomas as a non-believer or even a doubter. Jesus understood Thomas's skepticism and showed Thomas the proof of his resurrection. God comes to us knowing that we are human and only asks that we open our eyes to see and put out our fingers to touch. Jesus says, "Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed." Of course, we should, as devout Christians, believe in Jesus without demanding for evidence, but that is not easy. Yet, Jesus forgives us, even if, and for us teenagers, when we have doubts. And our Sunday school teachers as well tirelessly forgive us all the doubts we bring in and help us understand and get through those doubts. So each time I hear this passage, I initially feel guilt and shame for having these doubts. But eventually I realize that it is not the be-all and end-all to have doubts. Thomas, one of the disciples, one of the 12 who followed Jesus, had doubts. And Jesus came to him and helped him to believe. God comes to us and helps us believe in him, though our doubts may persist throughout our entire life. God accepts us as human beings, flawed though we may be. Nonetheless, Each time I hear this passage, I decide to try to doubt less. When I returned to Edzo's after school that day, I had been mulling over all of these feelings in my head. I knew that the man hadn't let me eat there because he knew me. I only came in every other week, and he didn't really know me that well. So he simply had faith in the common man and believed that I would come back. I'm still amazed at how strong his faith was and how he can remain so trusting in such a cynical world. And every Sunday, I see people at St. Paul's who reflect that self-same faith, who give me hope and evidence of God's love for us. Though my doubts may persist throughout my life, I will sometimes try to ignore them and have faith in God and in people.
Tomorrow is Monday, the start of a new school week. I'll wake up, stare at the ceiling, uncertain whether or not I'll get up at all. It's second semester of senior year. This is always an uncertainty. I'll put on my socks, uncertain whether or not there's a hole in the big toe. I'll glance at my clock, uncertain whether or not I'll make it to school on time. I'll get to school, uncertain whether or not I did all of my homework. I'll come home, uncertain whether or not I'll be as uncertain tomorrow as I was today. And repeat. Not a day goes by we don't encounter doubt in some form or another. It can be scary not to know what the day might throw at you and how much it'll hurt. The only way we know how to quell our feelings of doubt and anxiety come with proof. You prove to me there's jelly in my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I'll believe there's jelly in my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You show me a clock, you've proven to me what time it is. All people play by these rules, even the biblical ones. When Thomas refuses to believe that Jesus had risen again, he feels no differently than I before I put on my sock that might have a hole in the big toe. But while so many stigmatize the doubt that Thomas expressed, we forget that doubt is, in fact, a very good thing. Not only is it mere human nature to doubt our senses, it progresses the human cause. After hundreds of years of suffocation under the British Crown, a group of doubters saw uncertainty in the idea that an island thousands of miles away knew what was best for them. Not many years later, another doubter questioned the legitimacy of lifelong servitude on the basis of race and whether or not the notion that all men are created equal was in practice. 54 years later, a large number of doubters protested up and down the busiest streets in the country because they doubted the idea that 51% of the population should remain disenfranchised on the basis of gender. Doubt wrote the Declaration of Independence. Doubt freed generations of slaves. Doubt gave women the right to vote. And doubt created the atmosphere right here in our sanctuary, that God loves all people regardless of sexual orientation. That alone is a gift from God herself. Doubt progresses humankind. Through our doubt, we question things that must be questioned, and we discover things that await their discovery. In November, after months of writing and rewriting and then rewriting some more, I finally submitted my final college applications. 5 colleges received a few essays from a very high-strung teenager. My first decisions were to come in December, so that left me with a month of sheer agony. It was agonizing because I was so incredibly doubtful. What if I didn't proofread carefully enough? What if I don't get into my top school? What if I don't get in anywhere? These were very real doubts that crept into my brain countless times each day. By the grace of God, I will be attending Northwestern University come September. Sometimes, just for kicks, I'll visit the Common Application website where I wrote and submitted my college essays. I'll read my old essays and think, why was I so incredibly doubtful? I didn't need to be. Nobody needs to be that doubtful. And here's the best part. I didn't need to be doubtful at all because somewhere in my fingertips, God sat and watched as I wrote and submitted all of my applications. She sat at the other end of the computer on the shoulders of my readers. She came back in an email congratulating me on my acceptance to my dream school. This is what Thomas was forgetting. Seeing is, in fact, not always believing. There is a real, very real gift in being able to commit faith to God and to oneself. There's a doubting Thomas in everybody, and to fight him is to fight yourself. It's useless. Doubting is part of our being, just like our height or the color of our hair. To be perfectly honest, I don't always know whether or not I believe in God. I could walk down the street or turn on the news and see countless reasons why God couldn't possibly exist. What kind of God allows the persecution of women for wanting to be educated? What kind of God allows more murders right here in our own city than on the front lines of Iraq? And it is so easy to think this way. But what we so often forget is that God is not just in heaven. God is not just one being, but so many. There is God in Malala Yousafzai and in her campaign to educate the women of Pakistan. There is God in Gabby Giffords and her fight for rationality and gun regulations. But God is so much closer than that. I see the existence of God in the busloads of our church members who sacrifice a week of their lives to help those in need on ASP. God is the St. Paul's house and the night ministry. God is sleeping and waking up. God is food and water and all things in between. All of these things expel humankind's greatest doubt of all. One of my new favorite movies is About Time. This story centers around a young man named Tim who has the ability to travel through time by going into a closet or a cupboard, clenching his fists and imagining the moment in his life to which he wishes to revisit. In the end, Tim realizes that he need not travel in time at all, rather live each day as if it was a day he would want to revisit. The film concludes with a montage of some of the seemingly most mundane moments of daily life, like sitting on a park bench or taking a shower or taking a bite out of a donut. To us, we might experience nothing more out of those things than what we see on screen. But there is so much more in sitting on a park bench than just sitting. There's breathing in fresh air and looking out over the park. In showering, there's the time you have to sing with great acoustics while warm water goes through your hair. In taking a bite out of a donut, there is comfort in knowing that something so insignificant could taste so good. That is God. So tomorrow when I wake up and stare at my ceiling, doubting whether or not I'll get out of bed at all, I'll acknowledge the fact that I can wake up and that I can go to school, I can do all of my homework, and I can do it all the next day. If we spend all our time doubting, we miss out on what it is we disbelieve. So for all of you doubting Thomases out there, welcome to the club. It's a good place to be.